Hey guys, it's Sarah from Just My Typewriter, and I'm often asked the question, what's your favorite typewriter? And my answer is always, it depends on the day. But every once in a while, I'll run into a typewriter that I get to have, to use, to kind of bring back to life that I really fall in love with. And today I wanted to talk about one of those typewriters. So a few months ago, I was at a flea market in New Jersey. I've purchased typewriters here before. I had purchased previously my Smith Corona Silent from the 5 series here. It was the last one of my 5 series to kind of complete the collection. And I bought it from the flea market. It's a flea market outside, but inside it's a building just jam-packed full of stuff. I purchased this typewriter from them for about $25. The trick was I went on a rainy day when no one else was there and he had no other bites on his items, so I was able to negotiate him down from $50 to $25. I then went back again to this flea market a few times. It's about 30 minutes from me. I went earlier in the fall and tried to purchase a typewriter, but it was a sunny day, it was busy. I had thrown out the price of like $20 on this typewriter and he turned me down. I went a third time and I talked him down to $25 on this beautiful Underwood Star typewriter. He was going to charge me more than that. He was looking for $35, but he told me he'd give it to me for $25 if I could get the case closed, which I did. So I was able to come home with this beautiful Underwood Star. I was drawn to this typewriter for a few reasons. I think it's very obvious what the first one was. I love this blue color on the Underwood Star, but the other reason I wanted to purchase this machine was because I've previously owned 2 Golden Touch Underwood Deluxes from the 1950s and had kind of fallen in love with them, but it was kind of like a close but no cigar situation where I did really love these machines, but I just didn't feel as attached to them to want to keep them forever. So I did end up selling both of my Underwood Golden Touch Deluxes, one of which I purchased for $5 at a flea market, the other I bought for $25 at the Antique Depot, an antique store. This one I think is going to stay, and I have a couple reasons why. So this is a late 1950s Underwood Star typewriter. It does come from the Underwood Golden Touch line of typewriters from the 1950s, and I have done a video on the Golden Touch advertising from Underwood, so if you want to check that out, I'll link the video down in the description. But what's really interesting to me about this machine is that it's very difficult to find any information or advertisements specifically referencing the Star model of the line. Now there's a couple reasons for this. A lot of the typewriters in the Underwood line and a lot of lines of typewriters use the same body design as each other, but would have fewer and fewer features depending on which model you would get. So I went through and did a little bit of digging on the types of models that Underwood had during this time in their Golden Touch line in the portables. And here's what I found. Now I went through these advertisements and based on pricing and the amount of features listed, I determined where the models kind of fell in the line. You have things like the Underwood Deluxes and the Quiet Tabs and the Champions, but it's difficult to know where they kind of fall within line of each other based on features until you look at the prices of these machines. In an ad from the 1950s, 1954, I found this advertisement that lists the Champion as kind of the highest model of the line, followed by the Correspondent and then the Leader. Now the Leader has fewer model features on it than the Correspondent does and the Champion does, but they're based on similar body designs. As we go into 1955, they kind of add in the Deluxe machine. And so you go from the Deluxe at the top end of the line to the Finger Flight or the Champion Finger Flight, followed by the Universal, and then we have the Leader again at the bottom. And as you look at kind of the styles of machines from this era, the way it kind of goes is that the Deluxe is the top of the line and the Leader is the bottom of the line. And then you follow that with like an ultra portable like your Diplomat. In looking at the styles of, don't knock that over. In looking at the styles of these machines, the Deluxe often has some additional features like touch control. It usually has bicolor ribbon. Often the Deluxes, especially in this Golden Touch line, will have gold rimming around the edge of the keyboard on the typewriter. They're just kind of the souped up versions of these typewriters. And down at the bottom you have the Leader, which has the basic kind of functions. This is very similar to the Smith Corona 5 series line. If you look at how they divvy up their typewriters, you've got something like the Silent Super at the very top, and then you have something like the Clipper at the bottom of the line. Very similar in body style and in function, but fewer features as you go. Despite looking at all of these ads and figuring out where all of these models kind of fell in line with each other, I still could not find reference to a Star typewriter from Underwood. In fact, I couldn't find any advertisements on the Underwood Star model. And I couldn't even find many examples of the Star Underwood typewriter in the typewriter database or on the internet. I did have a subscriber and follower on Instagram message me and tell me that they had a Star typewriter, but it was in kind of the older style from the earlier 1950s in that leader or correspondent body style. It has a little bit of a different top to it. That's similar to what I found on the typewriter database. In fact, I couldn't find anybody who had a similar model to me until I did a lot of digging and used Google Lens. I found one singular Reddit post from someone trying to figure out how to unlock their carriage on their Underwood Star, and I didn't even see the front of the machine. I just saw the side, and it was the same blue finish in the smooth paint color. And then I did find one Facebook Marketplace listing in Aurora, Colorado, when I wasn't even trying, that had an Underwood Star typewriter in it. So it's difficult to find information on these models, but as we look at kind of the body construction of it, it's very similar to a lower end model from the Underwood line, and it looks a lot more like the later 50s models than the early 50s models. So I would guess that this is probably closer to 1957, 1958. It's very similar to the Underwood Golden Touch Deluxes I had before, but it is missing a few key features, and that's probably why it's more similar to those lower end models. Things like the golden rim around the edge is missing on this model. That would have been something that was put on the pricier ones. It's also missing a tab key, which is a little bit different. Some of the other models up the line have more keys on them. Anytime you're trying to reduce cost in a typewriter, you do have fewer keys. That's why you lose things like the 1 keys on lower 50 models, and you get it back on the higher models. It's missing the tab key. It also has a place for touch control underneath the hood of the typewriter. So touch control allows you to kind of fit the tension of the typewriter keyboard. Often on models, these will kind of look almost like a gear shift in your car, where it'll have a number from low to high and a switch inside. This has the place in the frame for that switch. There's a little tab here with the numbers already marked on it, but there's no switch attached, and it's not attached to any mechanism within the typewriter, which is kind of interesting. So again, that would be something that you'd probably have on a higher end model. The other thing it's missing is a ribbon color selector. So this typewriter types in only one color ink. You can't really switch between them. Not a big deal. They do still make singular color ribbons, or you can always put a bicolor ribbon on it and use whatever color you want as the top. But this one does not have a color selector switch. So it only types in one color. The other thing on this machine that's a little bit different than those 50s models I've had before is that this front is not spring loaded. So some Underwoods from the line, especially as you get higher up, have a push button front with the Underwood logo that you push to open the top of the typewriter to release this top cover. It's something that was on one of my favorite models, the Royal Futura. It's also on the Underwoods. It's something I really enjoy, but on these lower level models, it doesn't exist. So it's really only here on the front. You lift up instead of pushing a button to open up the top of this machine. So a model like this is very bare bones, and that's probably why I like it so much. So in my previous videos, I've talked about some of my favorite typewriters, and one of my favorite machines to ever own or to use is the Underwood Clipper. Now the Underwood Clipper is the lowest end of the 5 series. It has so few features on it compared to something like the Silent Super, but it's one of my favorite typewriters to use. It is easy to understand, there's nothing too complicated going on, and there's not a lot of bells and whistles. It's very similar to this machine here. So this machine has fewer features, but it's intuitive to use, it's easy to sit down and use, and there's nothing too distracting on it. It does have these visible margins on the back, which I do like in machines as compared to something like the Quiet Deluxes, which have invisible margins on the back, or they're magic margins. It doesn't have a paper baler up on top to kind of hold things in place. It's just got these little fingers across the front that hold your paper or your card in place, which I do actually prefer for things like index cards because they hold them closer to the platen. It's just, there's not a lot going on, and I think that's why I like using this machine so much. It's a very smooth experience, and it also is just easy to use. You can sit down at it and not have to do a lot of adjustments to be able to use it. And that's something I've really started to appreciate about typewriters, and these lower end models don't always get a lot of love. But there's 3 other reasons why I really love this typewriter and why this is my current go-to machine. The first is obviously the color. I know that's a very aesthetic thing, but I love blue typewriters. I have a blue typewriter problem, and I can't not have the blue typewriters. I couldn't find an ad specifically referencing the Underwood Star, but I did find these later 1950s ads featuring Underwood leaders, which look very similar to the Star model, and their color is called Yosemite Blue. So I've decided that that's what this color is. It's kind of a deeper shade of blue with a little bit more gray in it than bright popping colors of blue. And I did try to color match this machine because there was a few sections on it where the paint had just chipped away from use. It was really small, but it would be really easy to kind of touch up with some nail polish. So I did decide to make a custom shade for Yosemite Blue for this machine. And it didn't go as well as I planned because this color is so hard to specifically match. So I did get this shade originally, which kind of matched in the bottle, but on the machine was far too blue. Blank Beauty, which is the brand that I use to color match, does have a process where you can reorder a color if it's not exactly right. They helped me color match, and we got something that wasn't anywhere near it, but I decided to mix the two along with some other shades to get the perfect color of Yosemite Blue to cover up some of these paint chips, which worked pretty well. But this color is so specific and so interesting, and not like a lot of the other blues I have in my collection, which are often kind of this lighter shade of like aqua or teal. This is a very deep, dark blue color, and I really like that on these Underwood models from the 1950s. Another thing that I love about the Underwoods from the 1950s is their typeface. Now, when it comes to typewriter typefaces, and I do have a 101 video on typewriter typefaces here on the YouTube channel, which I'll link down below, I'm pretty much into the standard typeface. I have two machines that have special typefaces on them, and I never use them. I find them hard to read. I have a double Gothic Smith Corona, which types in all caps, and I find it really difficult to read. And then I also have a Spencerian script font on my Royal Safari, which I do love that machine, but again, I find it really difficult to read the text. So when it comes to typefaces, I like the standard, easy to read typeface that's on everything, kind of the precursor to Courier or Times New Roman. The Underwoods, however, in the 1950s had a specific typeface, and it was called Continental. Later, when they were adopted by Olivetti and had that merger, it was called Stymie typeface. And this typeface is more focused on circles. So typical letters like your O's and your Q's would have more of a long shape to them instead of being completely round, because they're based on ovals. But the Continental typeface is based on circles. So all of your letters and your numbers are way more rounded. They're a little bit more like a circle shape. So in your P's and your Q's and your O's, it's way more like a circle than it is an oval. It is so subtle that it's almost impossible to see, but I really love it on these machines. And it was something that I really loved about my previous Underwood typewriters, and a reason I wanted to keep them was because I love that style of the typeface. It's just slightly off, and I love the look of it. It's easy to read, and it's subtle enough where I think it's different enough to justify having it, but also legible enough to continue using over time. And I loved it was on this model. The third reason I'm kind of obsessed with this machine and why it's one of my favorites right now is because there's very little information on this specific model. With the typewriters in my collections, I have this tendency to become very attached to the ones that it's difficult to find information on. Prime example would be the Barbie typewriter. There's not a lot of info on those machines. Trust me, I've looked everywhere. And I love that about them. There's kind of this air of mystery to them. Another machine that I will always have is my Console 1511, which says Century across the front. I've only ever found one other model labeled the same way, and I love that you can't find information on it. It allows me to continue to dig into the typewriter itself. And I love that I have not been able to find an advertisement specifically mentioning the Underwood Star. However, if you find one, you can send it to me on Instagram at justonmy.typewriter. But I love that there's kind of this air of mystery about it. I mean, we know the basics. We know that it's based on the Underwood style from their deluxe line in the late 1950s. It's very similar to the Leader, which is the lower end of the line. It has very similar features to that machine. We kind of know the color, we know the typeface, but there's just something a little bit interesting about having a machine that has no ads. And I love that about this machine. When I got this machine, it was in almost perfect condition. There was very little rust, which I have run into on the Underwoods from this era before. I often find rust on the bottom of these machines. This one didn't have any of that. It was pretty clean. It just needed a little bit of an airing out. I did patch the paint chips on this machine, which come from typical wear. And the other thing that I did was on the case, which has seen better days, I did fill in the Underwood logo using whiteout because I thought it made it stand out a little bit more. And I kind of like that like finishing touch too, just making it look a little bit more elegant. So I bought this machine for $25. It had very minor repairs, which always makes me like a machine a little bit more because it was very easy to get up and running. And I just love that it is the base model. It does the job, it does everything you need it to, but it's got these like cute little quirks along with it. The color, the typeface, and this mystery history behind the Underwood Star. So that's one of my current favorite typewriters. I will not be selling this one, which is difficult for me to say because I'm running out of room. But when you run into a machine in the wild like this that just kind of makes you stop and look, I have a tendency to want to keep those machines around for a while. And I really do like that it's so easy to sit down and use. It's a very easy keyboard to use. I do like the shape of the keys, the finger flight keys on these machines. It's a little bit more like the Smith Corona keys than the Royal keys of the same era. And I just love the feel of it. It's very comparable to me to the Smith Corona Clipper, maybe a little less smooth. But I like the nature of it, the base model of this machine, and I just think it's stunning to look at. So that's been a little bit on my newer favorite typewriter, the Underwood Star model. If you know any information or have a similar model to me, please let me know down in the comments below. Are you that guy selling the Underwood Star in Aurora, Colorado? If so, I have no other information you can add to your ad. It's perfect. Good luck. If you're interested in other typewriter content, I do some other videos on this YouTube channel as well as on Instagram at just.my.typewriter. I want to thank you all so much for watching and remind you, you're just my typewriter. For those of you that watched my previous favorites video and saw that I fell in love with Dunkin's dark chocolate covered strawberry coffee and didn't recommend it, even though I love it, I purchased the last 3 remaining bags of it on eBay, so there's no more in the market. If you're looking for a replacement, Target has their Good and Gathered brand, and there's a coffee called Strawberries and Cream. It is a much more palatable version of my favorite. It's not the same as the original. I prefer the original, but it's not a bad substitute, if anybody cares to know.